Well, hey there, you're on the internet, I have some free time, and welcome to the Triple N Network, where all you newbie nib nerds can find all the news you'll need. Let's look at an ink today, shall we? Now, today's ink was actually probably my third or fourth bottle of Noodlers that I had ever owned. My first two were actually given to me like Christmas 2 years ago by family, and one of them told me about how they had wanted to buy this ink for me, but it was all out. They were all out at the store, and so instead they got me Dragon's Napalm. So I ended up going and finding it for myself. It is the infamous Apache Sunset. This is legendary in the fountain pen community. It's right up there with Parker Penman's Sapphire in some ways. It's famous for its ability to shade, which it really, really does. It goes from being sort of like a golden yellow at times when it's on certain papers when it's laid on thick enough to almost being a red. Yeah, I've had this ink for a little over 2 years, and so I've used about that much, which when you consider how much ink is in a Noodler's bottle, that's a fair bit. However, I mostly use it in this, my Conrad brush pen, which goes through ink like a fire hose. So yeah, I love that this ink exists. I love that I have a bottle of it. I love all the wonderful things it does. However, I can barely write in a way that I can read, so I don't really do calligraphy, and my flex nib stopped working a year ago, so I don't know if I'm going to be able to fully display the wonder of this ink. Besides, I have some issues with it, which we're gonna see. I make no secret of preferring Noodler's Habanero. Does it shade as much? No. Can it do all the things that this can do? No. But I don't flex, I don't calligraphy, I just write, and Habanero is more suitable for me for those purposes. This is an amazing ink. I feel that in many ways, in all the ways that I've heard of and know, has earned its reputation. It is a very gentle ink. It is extremely easy to clean out of your pens. Anyways, speaking of pens, the two pens that I used, one was this MonteVerde Impressa with a 1.1 stub, and the other was this Pilot Kaküno nib. You can probably, if I bring this in close, you see how the nib is deformed? Yeah, I had just washed it out, and I realized that there was a bunch of water still in it, so I was flicking it like this, like back and forth to try and get the water out, and it flew out of my hand, and it literally stuck into the drywall like that. So this pen is no more. But yeah, I also wanted to see what this ink could hold up to. So here's water, which really, really broke it apart. Like, it was completely coming apart. Like, the ink splotch stopped there, and that was all just moving. 1/3 bleach solution, however, does not get rid of this ink. It turns it pink red. It's like if you add bleach to this, you get Dragon's Napalm or something. It's very strange. Ammonia pen flush did really break it up. It really brought out that yellow. I wish that this would show up on camera. You can see that it was really separating from the paper. Hydrogen peroxide just sort of released the yellow and all the orange remained, so that was curious. Now, admittedly, there's a reason why Apache Sunset has the reputation it has. There is nothing quite like Apache Sunset. But, so here's Apache Sunset. Here's Diamond Autumn Oak. I think they were trying to go for an Apache Sunset type of thing. Diamond's Blaze Orange, which it is a lighter orange, and it does shade a lot. However, this one it shades a lot because it's kind of undersaturated. Here's Pilot's Iroshizuku Yuyake, which is their lighter orange. I think, what is it? I can't remember the name of their darker orange, but this one does shade a fair bit. My recent tests with this were not entirely positive, but that's a personal thing. My test did not go well for me. And lastly, Shoreline Gold. However, all of my use of Shoreline Gold, I don't know why these two get compared. I've heard that it's like Apache Sunset on Xanax. It's It's not. It's just not Apache Sunset any day of the week. But anyways, moving on. Paper test, top down in density, Clairefontaine 90 grams per square meter. Now, this was the first test that I did. This is just from a sheet of like binder paper, Clairefontaine. And you might be able to see that there is some shading, but compared to what you might be expecting, there's not a ton. And if I bring this in, hopefully you'll be able to see this. It's slightly woolly. And we even got some spread and some feathering, and that was a little odd. So I was like, that's not good. Decided to retest it. Got a piece of Seiya's paper. And you do see more shading on here. And you can see, one of the things I like about using the Stub is it really brings out the yellow. And at the bottom of the stroke, you can see where it starts getting closer to red, which is very pleasant. Really, Stubs really bring out the shading. However, this is also where we encounter my first major problem with this ink. Now, the Kaküno is a Japanese medium. It is much closer to my Western fines. And it is not overly wet, but it took 14 seconds to dry. And the 1.1 Stub took 26. This ink has long dry times. If you are a really patient person, that will not bother you at all. But yeah, it's yeah, this is an orange, but it's a yellow orange and it's a red orange and it shades like crazy, and it's generally well behaved. I didn't have any bleed or feather or spread or echo or sheen. The water test is rather amusing. The bottom part of this page just turned yellow. And it did kind of feather and explode a bit. Granted, that's towards the bottom. And some parts of some of these letters are just completely gone. This ink is not known for its water resistance. Now, next up is Fabriano paper, which I love. And lately I've been including in my test. I'm just going to hold this still so you can appreciate this. You can really see that shading on here. Yeah, it's beautiful. And again, the Stub really brings out some of that golden yellow and also down to where it's near red. But again, we have some really long dry times. The Kaküno took 14 seconds. The MonteVerde took 25. We do have some very long dry times. But we do also kind of get a halo effect, very minor, but also I kind of just want you to see this writing right here. Now, that's, especially in a pen this small, when one that isn't this wet, that's uncomfortably light for me to read. So in all of the tests, I also included this, habanero. It's written down at the bottom. This is with a wet Faber-Castell medium. And you can see that this medium, like the medium of this, is the dark of Apache Sunset. And here it really does almost seem red compared to this. And that's my preferred orange, because again, I just need it to write. I can't do calligraphy to save my life. But again, we see not the most water resistance. Most of that is gone. In fact, the camera's darkening it up a bit. But the Stub, which puts down more ink, you can really tell which dots and lines those were because they remained a bit more. The more you put down, the more there is to wash away and more there is to remain. Now, here's Rhodia, 80 grams per square meter. Yeah, that Kaküno took 15 seconds to dry, and the Stub took 26. It so didn't want to seep into the paper that there was so much of this ink to smear. You do get a great variation of color. You can see just how light it can be in the smear, and you also see just how dark it can get, which is quite fascinating. If you want a shading ink, of course, this is the one that I'm going to recommend, but you need patience. Yeah, and again, like if we just look at this writing, it's just too light for me. The Stub is a bit better, but again, because of that Stub dragging the ink around and the longer dry times, you get quite light in places. Habanero is better for me. It's just a bit darker. It's a bit more comfortable for me to read. Again, this whole bottom part of the page turned yellow. This remained a bit more than we saw in the Clairefontaine or the Fabriano. But yeah, the Stub, once again, it's very clear which part of that remained. No bleed, no feather, no spread, no echo, no sheen. None of that so far. Now, next up is Tomoe River paper, which is known for drawing out shading and dry times. So we're going to get both here. Yeah, you'd think that, okay, world's most shading ink, this paper, great. Not for me. Yeah, so when I was writing this and I was sort of scooching it up the page, I realized that I smeared this, and that was more than a minute later. And so later, when I was done writing the page, I looked up and I saw that this area was still wet. And that was 4 minutes later, and that's smeared. Sometimes this ink just takes forever and a half to dry on this paper. I say here, I don't have the patience of a saint. I really don't. I mean, look at this. The stub took more than a minute to dry. I usually stop counting after 30. This Japanese medium took 24 seconds to dry. I mean, do you get amazing shading? Yes. Yes, you do. I mean, look at how yellow, bright yellow that is. And look at how dark that is. Is it gorgeous? Yes. But if I'm just like writing in a journal, first of all, it's just too light for me to comfortably read a lot of. I mean, more than 4 lines, and that's going to get kind of tiring on my eyes. Yeah, but yeah, there's no bleed, there's no feather, there's no spread, there's no echo, there's no there is some echo in the stub, but that is, you know, the stub is leaving it on a bit heavier, and it's very thin paper. I just prefer my habanero. But yeah, this paper is infamous for letting ink slide away when you add more water, and that is most definitely what happened here. Again, the stub left a tiny bit more. Once again, the camera's darkening this up a bit. The stub left a tiny bit more, and you can tell which one was which. Now, for the next 3 tests, I only used the Kaküno with the Japanese medium, except to write the name. Here is the world's worst 20-pound copier paper. And this is just a bit too light for me. The paper, because it's absorbent, seems to like suck out some of the vibrancy. It seems to suck out the ability to shade, and without that, we don't have that contrast of light and dark, sort of making it easier on the eye. And so, yeah, I just prefer my habanero. That's just a bit darker. It's more comfortable for me. And since this ink is like all about the shading, and on here there's no shading, you don't really have a good trade-off for the spread that you get, because the line definitely looks like a medium on here. And you get feathering. Let's look at loss. Is orange. You get a woolly texture. You get, okay, that's the stub, but you get bleed. It's just so light that the camera doesn't want to pick it up. But it's everywhere, and it's all throughout. And this is a Japanese medium, and it's quite moderate. So, yeah. Now, the water test, because it's more absorbent, it sucks the ink in, makes it harder to wash out, but it's so light. It's so light. Once again, the camera's trying to darken it. This entire area of the page has gone yellow, and this feathered and exploded at the center. It's not easy to read. It would not be fun to recover. Next up is Mead Notebook Paper, which is, you know, the cheap stuff that you can get in, like, pharmacies. They give it to us at school. It's physically thinner than 20-pound copier paper, and yet on here, I feel like you can see that there's a teeny bit of shading remaining. There's just a bit, not a lot. It's still pretty light. Took 3 seconds to dry, which on paper this is absorbent is kind of surprising. There is some feathering, but not as much as I was anticipating. There's not as much spread. In fact, there's not a lot of spread. There's not a lot of feathering at all. And there's, okay, that's the stub. There's almost no bleed. You get a little bit in the scrubby, you get a little bit in the occasional downstroke, but it was actually quite well behaved on here. Not perfect, but not bad. The water test, this paper hates water, but what's kind of interesting is you almost get this like pink at the center. If the camera will calm down, you almost get this pinkiness at the center with the yellow and the orange shooting off. It would not be the most fun or easy to recover, but, I mean, if your life depended on it, maybe you could. Now, next up, and lastly, is Moleskin notebook paper, which I hate because it hates ink, and it really hated this ink. Let's look at the, or Quick, or Pilot, or Kaküno, or any of this. We get this extreme woolliness. We don't really have shading anymore. It took 4.5 seconds to dry. It feathered. Oddly, it didn't spread much. The line didn't get much bigger unless we're counting like lateral feathering. It's not great. And okay, that's the stub, and I hope this comes through on camera, but we have very near bleed everywhere in this Japanese medium. But yeah, and also the water test was a little insane, which is another reason I hate Moleskine, because it tends to do this. Not only in a lot of the other papers, the central writing will remain and the stuff that's going to wash off will feather and explode. But here on Moleskine, a lot of times that central pinkiness even, like on here it's pink, is feathering and exploding too. This would be a nightmare to try and recover. So yeah, there you go. There's the infamous Noodler's Apache Sunset. It was requested that I review this ink, and that's why I've done it now and not before. In part because I love it in the idea and all the things that it does and how happy it makes other people. For me, it's you know, mid-shelf bottle of ink. It's not one that I'm super excited about and reach for all the time, because I don't have the crazy calligraphy uses for it. This was me trying. It was terrible. Yeah. But yeah, you definitely got to try it. If you have access to this ink, you definitely should try it. For your consideration from the Triple N Network, if you liked the video, please give it a thumbs up. If you'd like to see more, please subscribe to the channel. And thanks for watching. Bye.